Right now, somewhere in America, there is a single mother pulling into a gas station. She is looking at the price on the pump and doing math in her head. She is calculating whether she can afford to fill the tank all the way or whether she needs to stop at half and hope it lasts until Friday. She has never read a single article about Iran. She has never watched a single geopolitical breakdown. She does not know where the Strait of Hormuz is on a map. She does not care about enrichment levels or proxy militias or nuclear thresholds. And yet, the decisions being made right now between Washington and Tehran will determine how much money is left in her bank account. At the end of this month, not next year, not in some abstract future. This month, this week, the next time she swipes her card at that pump, that is what this video is about. Not politics, not ideology, not who is right and who is wrong. This is about what happens to your money, your job, your grocery bill, your rent, your retirement account, your children's future, and your daily life if this conflict escalates, and what happens if it does not. Because either way, the impact is already hitting you, you just have not been told how. Most Americans hear the words Iran and war in the same sentence, and they immediately sort themselves into two categories. One group says we need to be strong and defend our interests. The other group says we cannot afford another war in the Middle East, and then both groups go back to their lives and forget about it until the next. Headline. But here is the thing that neither group understands. This is not a question you get to have an opinion about and then move on. This is a question that is actively reshaping your financial reality right now, today, whether you pay attention to it or not, and the difference between understanding what is happening and not understanding. What is happening is the difference between being prepared and being blindsided. So let me show you exactly what is at stake, dollar by dollar, impact by impact, in language that has nothing to do with foreign policy and everything to do with your kitchen table. Let us start with the thing you will feel first and feel hardest: energy prices. The United States produces more oil domestically today than at any point in its history. That is a fact, and most Americans hear that and assume it means we are energy independent and whatever happens in the Middle East does not affect us anymore. That assumption is dangerously wrong. Here is why oil is a globally priced commodity. It does not matter how much oil America produces. The price you pay at the pump is set by the global market. If supply anywhere in the world gets disrupted, the price everywhere in the world goes up, including in Texas, including in North Dakota, including at every single gas station in every single state in America. This is not theory. This is how the market has worked for 50 years, and it has never once worked differently. Iran sits on one side of the Strait of Hormuz. That is a narrow waterway, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, through which approximately 20–25% of all the oil traded on the entire planet passes every single day. 1 out of every 4 or 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth squeezes through that tiny choke point. If a military conflict between the United States and Iran causes that strait to be disrupted, even partially, even temporarily, even for a few weeks, the price of oil globally does not just go up. It spikes. It spikes in a way that most living Americans have never experienced. During the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Iranian oil exports were disrupted, oil prices doubled within 12 months. During the 1990 Gulf War, when there was merely the threat of supply disruption, oil prices spiked 70% in 3 months. Analysts at major financial institutions have modeled what a closure, or even a partial disruption of the Strait of Hormuz would do to oil prices today. The estimates range from oil hitting $150 per barrel on the low end to over $300 per barrel in a worst-case scenario. Right now, oil trades at roughly $70 to $80 per barrel. You are paying somewhere around $3 to $3.50 per gallon at the pump, depending on where you live. If oil hits $150 per barrel, you are paying $6 to $7 per gallon. If it hits $200, you are paying $8 to $9 per gallon. And if it hits $300, you are looking at $12 to $15 per gallon. That is not a typo. That is the math. Now think about what that means for your daily life. Not in abstract geopolitical terms, in terms of your actual Tuesday morning. Your commute to work just doubled or tripled in cost. The truck that delivers groceries to your local supermarket runs on diesel. Diesel prices follow the same curve. So the price of every single item on every single shelf in every single grocery store in America goes up. Not by a little, by a lot. Milk, bread, eggs, meat, vegetables, all of it. The cost of heating your home in winter if you use oil or natural gas goes up. The cost of cooling your home in summer goes up because electricity generation still relies significantly on natural gas. The cost of every single product that is manufactured, shipped, or delivered using any form of fossil fuel, which is essentially every product in the American economy, goes up. This is not inflation in the normal sense. This is a supply shock, and supply shocks do not respond to the usual tools the Federal Reserve uses to control prices. You cannot fix a supply shock by raising interest rates. You just have to absorb it, and absorbing it means every American household gets poorer in real terms almost overnight. Tell me in the comments, Have you already started feeling price increases in your daily life over the last few months, and did anyone explain to you where those increases were actually coming from? Now let us talk about the second impact, and this is the one that will affect a completely different group of Americans. Your retirement savings, your investments, your 401,000. If you have money in the stock market, and roughly 60% of American adults do either directly or through retirement accounts, then a military. Escalation with Iran is a direct threat to your financial future, not a theoretical threat, a documented, measurable historical threat. Every single military conflict the United States has engaged in over the last 30 years has produced the same pattern in the stock market. In the weeks leading up to military action, uncertainty drives volatility. Markets swing wildly, investors panic, billions of dollars move out of stocks and into safe havens like gold and treasury bonds. When the first strikes happen, there is usually a sharp sell-off. Depending on the scale and duration of the conflict, markets can drop anywhere from 5 to 20% in a matter of weeks. For context, a 10% drop in the S&P 500 wipes out approximately $4 trillion in market value. That is not Wall Street's money. That is your money. That is your 401,000. That is your IRA. That is the college fund you set up for your kids. That is the retirement you have been working toward for 30 years. Now here is the part that makes this even more painful. After the initial drop, markets do eventually recover. They always have historically. But the recovery takes time. After the 2003 Iraq invasion, it took the market roughly a year to find its footing. If you were 55 years old and planning to retire at 60, and a significant chunk of your retirement savings disappeared in a conflict-driven market crash, you just lost years of compounding growth that you cannot get back. Time is the one thing in investing that you cannot replace, and a war with Iran at the wrong moment in your financial life could be the difference between retiring at 62 and retiring at 68. That is not dramatic language. That is the actual math of how market disruptions affect long-term retirement planning. But there is another side to this, and I want to be honest with you about it because this channel does not do propaganda in either direction. There are sectors of the American economy that benefit enormously from military conflict, and if you understand which sectors those are, you can at least make informed decisions about your own financial positioning. Defense contractors see their stock prices rise significantly during periods of military tension. Energy companies with domestic production see their profits explode when global oil prices spike. Cybersecurity firms see increased government contracts. Aerospace and weapons manufacturers see order books fill up years in advance. During the period surrounding the 2003 Iraq War, the stock prices of major defense contractors rose between 40 and 120%. If you owned those stocks, you made a lot of money. If you did not, you watched your other investments lose value while a very specific group of companies and their shareholders got substantially richer. This is the economic reality of war that nobody wants to say out loud. War is not economically neutral. It is a massive transfer of wealth. It transfers wealth from ordinary consumers who pay higher prices for everything, to energy companies and defense contractors who profit from the disruption. It transfers wealth from young soldiers who risk their lives to shareholders who risk nothing. It transfers wealth from taxpayers who fund the operations to the private companies that receive the contracts. This is not a political statement. This is an accounting statement. You can verify every word of it in public financial records. If this analysis is showing you connections that no one has laid out for you before, a like genuinely helps this reach the people who need to see it most. Now let me show you the next layer, because we are about to get into the part that affects the largest number of Americans in the most direct way possible. Inflation. Let us talk about inflation. Because if you are an American who has spent the last 3 years watching your purchasing power slowly erode, watching your paycheck buy less and less every single month, watching the price of housing and food and healthcare climb while your wages stay flat, then you need to understand exactly how a conflict with Iran makes that situation dramatically worse. The United States has been fighting to bring inflation under control after the post-pandemic spike. Interest rates have been raised aggressively. The Federal Reserve has been tightening monetary policy, and slowly, painfully, inflation has been coming down. A major military conflict with Iran reverses all of that progress in a matter of weeks, not months, weeks. Because inflation is fundamentally driven by two things: too much money chasing too few goods, and supply chain disruptions that reduce the availability of goods. A war in the Persian Gulf region triggers both simultaneously. Energy prices spike, which increases the cost of producing and transporting every single good in the economy, that is supply-side inflation. At the same time, the government increases military spending dramatically to fund operations, which pumps more money into certain sectors of the economy, that is demand-side inflation. You get hit from both directions at once, and the Federal Reserve is left with an impossible choice: raise interest rates further to fight inflation, which crashes the housing market and triggers a recession, or keep rates where they are and let inflation run, which destroys the purchasing power of every dollar in your bank account. There is no good option. There is only less bad and more bad. During the stagflation period of the late 1970s, which was triggered in large part by the Iranian Revolution and the oil price shocks that followed, the United States experienced inflation rates above 13%. Mortgage rates hit 18%. Unemployment rose to nearly 11%. The American middle class experienced one of the most devastating periods of economic decline in the 20th century, and that was triggered by a disruption that was significantly smaller in scale than what a full military conflict with Iran would produce today. The global economy is more interconnected now. Supply chains are more fragile, and the starting point for this potential shock is an economy that is already stretched thin from pandemic recovery. Now let us talk about the human cost, because this is the part that I think most Americans have not fully processed. If the United States enters a sustained military conflict with Iran, American service members will be deployed to a combat theater. Some of them will not come home. This is not hypothetical. This is what war means. And the scale of a conflict with Iran would be unlike anything the American military has faced since Vietnam. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran has a population of over 88 million people. It has a landmass 3 times the size of Iraq. Its geography is dominated by mountain ranges that make ground operations extraordinarily difficult. Its military, while not comparable to the U.S. military in technology, is large, well-trained, and specifically organized around the doctrine of asymmetric warfare designed to inflict maximum casualties on a technologically superior invader. Iran has spent 40 years studying exactly how the United States fights wars. They have designed their entire military strategy around exploiting the specific weaknesses of American military doctrine. Military analysts who have war-gamed a full-scale conflict with Iran estimate American casualties in the tens of thousands in the first year alone. Not hundreds, thousands. Those are not just numbers. Those are sons and daughters. Those are parents. Those are neighbors. Those are the 22-year-old kid from your town who joined the military because it was the best option available to pay for college. Every single one of those casualties creates a family that is never the same again, a community that carries that loss forever, a cost that never appears in any budget document or any economic analysis but is more real than any number on any spreadsheet. And then there are the veterans who come home, the ones who survive but carry wounds that do not show up in photographs, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, chronic pain from blast exposure. The veteran suicide rate in the United States is already at crisis levels, with an estimated 17 veterans taking their own lives. Every single day, every new conflict adds to that number. Every deployment creates more people who will need support and care for the rest of their lives. And the Department of Veterans Affairs is already overwhelmed, already underfunded, already struggling to meet the needs of veterans from the last 2 wars. This is the cost that never makes it into the cable news debate. The talking heads argue about strategic interests and regional balance and nuclear thresholds. Nobody puts a camera in front of a mother who just received a folded flag and asks her whether she thinks the Strait of Hormuz was worth it. Now I want to talk about something that almost no one is discussing, and it might be the most important long-term impact of all. What a war with Iran does to America's position in the world, not militarily, economically, strategically, in terms of the relationships and alliances that actually determine whether America remains the dominant global power for the next 50 years. The United States is currently in a 3-way strategic competition with China and Russia. This is the defining geopolitical contest of the 21st century. And here is what most Americans do not realize. A war with Iran benefits China more than it benefits the United States, significantly more. If the United States commits military resources, financial resources, political attention, and diplomatic capital to a conflict in the Middle East, all of those resources are not available for the competition with China. Every dollar spent on missiles fired at Iranian targets is a dollar not spent on countering Chinese technological advancement. Every naval vessel deployed to the Persian Gulf is a vessel not deployed to the South China Sea. Every year of political bandwidth consumed by managing a Middle Eastern war is a year not spent on building economic partnerships in Asia and Africa and Latin America, where China is rapidly expanding its influence. China understands this perfectly. Beijing's ideal scenario is one in which the United States gets bogged down in another decade-long Middle Eastern conflict while China quietly continues building economic relationships across the developing world. By the time America looks up from the desert, China has locked up trade agreements, infrastructure, projects, and resource access across 3 continents. This is not speculation. This is exactly what happened during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. While America spent 20 years and over $8 trillion in the Middle East, China built the Belt and Road Initiative, became the largest trading partner of virtually every country in Asia, Africa, and South America, and positioned itself as an alternative to American economic leadership. A war with Iran gives China another 10 to 15 years of uncontested expansion. That is a strategic gift of almost incomprehensible value. Drop your answer in the comments. When you weigh all of these costs together, the gas prices, the inflation, the market impact, the human casualties, the strategic cost with China, do you think there is any scenario where a full-scale war with Iran produces a net benefit for the average American? I want to hear your honest assessment. Now let me address the other side of this argument, because intellectual honesty demands it. There are people who argue that the long-term cost of not confronting Iran is even higher than the cost of confrontation, and their argument is not without merit. Here is the strongest version of that case. If Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, it fundamentally changes the power dynamics of the entire Middle East. Saudi Arabia has publicly stated that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, they will acquire one as well. Turkey has made similar implications. Egypt would likely follow. Within a decade of Iran going nuclear, you could have 4 or 5 nuclear-armed states in the most unstable region on the planet. States with border disputes, religious rivalries, ethnic conflicts, and active proxy wars against each other. The probability of a nuclear weapon being used, either deliberately or through miscalculation, increases exponentially with every new nuclear state. And if a nuclear weapon is ever detonated in the Middle East, the global economic consequences would make everything I have described so far look trivial by comparison. Oil prices would not double. The entire global energy infrastructure would be disrupted for years. The economic damage would be measured in the tens of trillions of dollars. People who support confrontation argue that paying a high cost now to prevent that scenario is rational, that the short-term pain of a military conflict is preferable to the long-term existential risk of a nuclear-armed Middle East, and if you are being intellectually honest, you have to admit that this argument has logical force. The question is not whether the risk is real. The risk is real. The question is whether military force is actually the most effective way to address that risk. And on that question, the historical evidence is deeply troubling. The United States invaded Iraq to prevent weapons of mass destruction, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. The United States intervened in Libya to prevent a humanitarian disaster and created a failed state that has been in chaos for over a decade. The United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan trying to build a stable government, and the Taliban took the country back in 11 days. The track record of American military intervention achieving its stated objectives in this region is, by any honest assessment, extremely poor. That does not mean the current situation is acceptable. It means that the tool being proposed to fix it has failed repeatedly, in nearly identical circumstances. Now here is where I bring this all together, because I promised you at the beginning of this video that by the end you would understand exactly what this conflict means for your life, and I want to deliver on that promise with complete clarity. If you are an American, here is what is at stake for you personally. Your energy costs are directly tied to stability in the Persian Gulf, whether you believe they should be or not. Your grocery bill is directly tied to energy costs. Your rent is tied to construction costs, which are tied to energy and material costs. Your retirement savings are tied to market stability, which is tied to geopolitical risk. Your tax burden is tied to military spending, which increases dramatically during conflict. Your children's economic future is tied to whether the United States maintains its strategic position relative to China or squanders it in another Middle Eastern war. And if you or someone you love serves in the military, their physical safety and mental health are directly on the line. Every single one of these impacts is real. Every single one is measurable. Every single one is supported by historical data from previous conflicts. And every single one is being actively shaped right now by decisions being made in rooms you will never enter, by people you will never meet, based on calculations that have nothing to do with your well-being and everything to do with strategic and financial interests that operate on a completely different level from your daily life. The most important thing you can do as an American citizen right now is not to pick a side. It is not to decide whether you are pro-war or anti-war. It is to understand clearly and completely what the actual costs and consequences are, because you cannot make an informed decision about something you do not understand, and the people making these decisions on your behalf are counting on the fact that you do not understand. They are counting on you reacting emotionally to a headline instead of thinking critically about what that headline actually means for your family. They are counting on you sorting yourself into a team and cheering or booing without ever asking the one question that actually matters, which is, what does this cost me? Not my country in the abstract. Me, my family, my community, my future. That is the question this video was built to answer. Not to tell you what to think, but to make sure you have the information you need to think for yourself, because the only person in this entire global chess game who actually cares about your family is you, and the only way to protect what matters to you is to understand the forces that are acting on your life, whether you are paying attention to them or not. Understanding geopolitics is not an academic exercise. It is not a hobby for people who like reading about foreign countries. It is the most practical, most directly relevant, most personally important form of knowledge that exists, because the price of your gas, the value of your savings, the safety of your children, and the future of your country are all being determined right now by geopolitical forces that most Americans cannot name and have never been taught to recognize. This channel exists to change that. one video at a time. If you made it to the end of this breakdown, you now understand more about how this conflict affects your daily life than 99% of the people who will argue about it online today. That is not flattery. That is a fact. Because most people will never watch something this long or think this deeply about something this uncomfortable. But you did. And that means you are exactly the kind of person who needs to be in this conversation. Subscribe if you have not already. Every breakdown on this channel is built with this same depth, this same honesty, and this same commitment to showing you what is actually happening, not what someone wants you to believe is happening. The next video on this channel is already in production, and it covers the one economic shift that is quietly restructuring the entire global financial system right now. A shift that will determine whether the American middle class grows or shrinks over the next 20 years. It connects directly to everything you just learned. It will be on screen the moment it drops. This has been an Atlas Geopolitical Analysis. All content is educational commentary and opinion based on historical patterns and publicly available information.